because when you speak, you sound like an expert. Yes? I have an interesting background. I graduated with chemical engineering back in Poland, came to States and started a Masonry restoration company. And I was working on buildings and I was questioning the materials that I was using because I wasn't too happy with the results over time. So in 1998 I had started another company called US Heritage Group. And US Heritage Group is a well-known company that provides materials for restoration of historic structures around the country. And it's all based on samples of materials that we receive from buildings, and we take these samples apart and we custom make materials for a particular project. Why are we doing it? Because we believe that if you repair like with like, or you replace like with like, you have like performance. Okay? And I compare this to our blood. Okay, that where we go to a hospital for operation, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to test our blood, because in case we need it, they have enough on a reserve, and that never changed, right? From the time we're born to the time we die, we have the same blood. The building has the same mortar, and the mortar is as important as blood in our body, and we'll talk about it. So I have seen a lot of problems in buildings over time as I build on buildings around Chicagoland area, and I also work on buildings around the country where I lecture or I train or I evaluate the conditions of buildings through United States, and from US Capitol to fortresses built by Spaniards. I've been there, I've seen that, and I see what works and what doesn't work. So that knowledge we kind of apply here locally, and I have a lot of presentations and demonstration material because we do this on a regular basis. So today we will be talking about conditions on your buildings, and I also have some display material in here to identify differences between modern and traditional materials. I also have some mortar of the period that these buildings were built, and we can do a little pointing, and I can show you how material is installed, how the material is finished, and so on, and how it should look after it's in the wall. Because we see a lot of bad work everywhere, okay? And typical contractors don't understand the changes in materials over time. Buildings were built for thousands of years, literally. Okay, and they were built with pretty much the same mix until the 20th century. In the 20th century we have changes because of the speed of construction, because of the height of the buildings, and so on. So we needed materials that will set faster, that will be harder essentially. But before that time, buildings were relatively small, you know, you're looking at 3, 4, probably 6 or maybe 10 stories, and they were built with basic mix, sand and lime, and nothing else. Sand and lime, sand and lime. And when you're looking at the buildings throughout the world, and you're wondering, you know, why 16th century building, which is a hotel, and you're staying in it, it looks so great. Well, because it's built with sand and lime, and it's been maintained with sand and lime until today. Okay, if you start bringing modern materials to this 16th century building, you basically destroy it. And that's what happens here. 1920s, okay, it's still a time where typical materials that we find in buildings. So bungalows, two flats, they all have pretty much the typical material, stone, usually limestone as a decorative element, or entire face, a calcium-based sedimentary material, plenty of it in this area because we are not far from the quarry, Indiana limestone. Very good material, very durable, buff, gray, bluish gray colors. Okay. We also have some sandstones in the area. You see them mostly at the Gold Coast. The entire facades are being completed with sandstone or sills, coping stones, and so on. This is also sedimentary material. It comes in a buff, brown, red, and even green color. And they are much softer than limestones, and they need more care. There are also stones that were used to build barns and buildings farther away from the city. We call it a rubble stone. This is a historic structure in Chicago, with the stone that's nicely shaped. On the front of the building, what you see is a face brick. We call it a face brick, and you have a variety of face bricks. You know, they vary in length, height, they vary in colors, and they also vary in texture. Because it was a decorative element, you want to show off to the neighbors how you appreciate the beauty of the building. On the side and on the back of the house, you usually have common brick. It's a commonly found brick that was produced in Chicago at the corner of Grant and Narragansett. Today we have a brickyard shopping center. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it used to be. When I came to States in '77, they were still producing bricks in that. We also have some render, we call it. It's just basically a stucco on buildings. And when we're looking at the brick, we also have to realize and talk about joints, because joints are vary in sizes. Where you have a nice face with in an elegant building, you usually have very narrow joints. You can see lime inclusions in here. This is how I tell that this is a lime mortar. You see the lime inclusions in here everywhere. So this is a nice wire cut, we call it a face brick, because the grooves are made by the wire as the brick was extruded prior to being fired. This is a rubble stone. Also, you can see nice lime inclusions everywhere in here. You can see these houses built with the material like in Joliet and St. Charles and farther away from the city. There are some interesting joints that you can find on buildings. This is called a ribbing joint, which kind of projects on the outside. Or this is nice decorative bead joint, usually on the face of the stone. And this is a tuck pointing. You see the black lines that are put over a parging. This is a true tuck pointing. This is a historic technique that was used since medieval times. And you can see some of the tuck pointing still in Chicago, mostly in Lincoln Park area, Gold Coast area. Well, we need to talk about the problems, and we need to talk about what caused these problems in buildings. And when you see here is basically trapped moisture. Moisture is trapped in buildings by materials that are being used for repairs. Because moisture can migrate into the masonry and can migrate out of the masonry unless it's trapped. And once it's trapped, creates all kinds of conditions. For bricks, usually you see that white powder, we call it efflorescence. That's because the moisture doesn't dry fast enough. Okay, the mortar prohibits that moisture to evaporate, and that moisture in the masonry dissolves salts, which is we call them sulfates, and these sulfates will migrate towards the surface. If you will seal the surface of the brick, you will basically trap the sulfates inside, and we call it a subfluorescence. And this subfluorescence will basically crystallize behind the face of the brick, and the brick will lose its face. So when you have bricks with face deterioration, usually is caused by the migration of salts. So a little bit history of lime being used for 6,000 years roughly all over the world, and it's an element that creates a sacrificial joint. Joint is like our blood, basically, responsible for a lot of functions, from cleaning of our system to distributing nutrients to our system and so on. Mortar is like blood. It's responsible for taking all the moisture out, let's go back there, from the wall, taking the salts out from the wall, and it's designed to fail. So when you see mortar that you can scrape with the knife or a screwdriver, you know that you have a good mortar. If you cannot scrape mortar out, that mortar is way too hard. So you're looking at the condition of brick, and it's perfect condition, and you're looking at the condition of mortar, and mortar is failing, supposedly. That's the good thing. The mortar is doing its job. It's actually working as it's designed to work. So what happens when you build buildings in the front of the ocean and the water splashes it and so on? You have to repair the mortar quite often. So there was always a need to develop more durable material. And in 1824, British mason invented Portland cement. Okay, 1824. So before that date, all the buildings built all over the world were built without Portland cement. In the United States, in 1871, the first Portland cement manufacturer was established. So in America, everything that was built prior to that date was built without Portland cement. Okay? It took a long time for Portland to become popular. Almost 40 years before it becomes popular. But once we have a Portland, now our mixes have changed. This is original mix of 6,000 years of construction history. 1 part of lime, 3 parts of sand. Compressive strength between 75 pounds per inch to 300 pounds per inch. I'm going to go back there a bit. And now, once we have Portland, we're adding a Portland to the mix. This is 1 part of Portland, 3 parts of lime, 12 parts of sand. We have type O mortar, 1 part of Portland, 2 parts of lime, 9 parts of sand. The most popular mix today is type N mix, 1 Portland, 1 lime, and 6 sands. But you also have mixes of 1 Portland, only quarter lime, and 3 sands, which is a very hard mix, 2,500 psi. Very hard, very dense. So for historic structures like yours, we are working in pretty much this area, where we're using mostly lime, sometimes a little bit of cement when we're working on the parapet wall or the chimney. But if we're working on the rest of the wall, we usually use type L mortar without any cement. What happens if the mortar is too strong? Okay, this is what happens. You see that lines of mortar almost looks like a sidewalk. It's perfect condition, but the stone deteriorates. Where you repoint soft common brick with cement mortar, even inside, you condensating moisture in a cavity between the layers of bricks, and the moisture migrates inside and develops this efflorescence. Conditions are like molds are very common in buildings, especially in churches where there is not enough ventilation, where there's a lot of cement on walls. And the attempts are made to remove these conditions by sealing. We want to seal off the walls by putting a cement mortar in a joint, by putting a caulking everywhere, and because we're trying to avoid these conditions. This is a black mold. Unfortunately, the committee that take care of this church doesn't understand that you need to ventilate, you need to allow the moisture to migrate out. You cannot seal it in. So hundreds of thousands of dollars are being spent to restore buildings, and this is a military academy in Culver, Wisconsin, where they have repointed entire chapel and replaced the roof. And they called me 5 years later and asked me if I can clean interior limestone. And I was very disturbed to see these conditions, because these conditions didn't exist before they repaired the brickwork. So they spend money and basically destroying a building. So let's talk about water, because water is this decay element. This is the decay mechanism, we call it. The water is always present in our life. And the water comes from the rain, comes from the rising damp, and it comes from interior through the condensation. Go back there. And that mortar that is softer than brick, much porous than the brick, will absorb that moisture and allow the moisture to migrate out. Over time, mortar will deteriorate, mortar will sacrifice itself. If we repair that damaged mortar, or the mortar that is failing, with cement, we put this cement in the front of our joint, we still have the same conditions. We still have the rising damp, we have the water vapor and the rain. Now the difference is that moisture cannot migrate through the joint. It is being forced back into the brick or stone, and that deteriorates brick or stone. So it is critical to use traditional materials in restoration of traditional buildings, if we like looking for long-term performance. So what I do when I want to find out how the mortar is working, I'm using this very basic device, moisture meter, and I put in a stone, and then I put in a mortar joints after the rain, and I see that mortar is helping for moisture to escape, because the dampness is in a joint. In another area of the building, I found that the mortar is much denser, and it doesn't allow for moisture to escape, because there is more moisture in the stone than mortar. And you can see the stone is already deteriorating. So the differences between lime mortars and cement mortars is one, breathability, basically breathes the moisture out, and it's permeable. Cement is impermeable. Lime mortar is flexible, cement is rigid, so the building needs to move. Lime will allow, cement won't. Soft versus high strength, and self-healing versus easy cracking. So buildings built in 20s and prior to these dates are solid load-bearing walls. Today we're building veneer type buildings where we attach brick to the wood framing. Systems were breathable, moisture or water was absorbed and released by the masonry units and mortar, and bricks were much softer than bricks of today. So, common problems: falling masonry, cracking, staining, efflorescence, bulging, leaning walls. It's all due to the moisture. You see the signs of moisture by the darkness of the brick or the stone. This is how you tell if the moisture is in the wall. You see cracking, the vertical step cracking. Mm-hmm. You see deteriorated lintels, any metal elements in walls because of the moisture presence. You see staining, that moisture basically attracts soiling from the atmosphere, and the soiling is attached to the stone or brick. Allergy growth, chemical staining, where chemicals are improperly used to clean buildings. Sandblasting being quite often used until 1990s. Mm-hmm. Now it's against the law to use sand to clean buildings. Damage caused by improper repairs, where masons are not using proper tools to cut the joints, and so on. And when we have conditions where we trying to repair by parging walls or pointing at with improper materials, we're creating more damage to the building structure. Efflorescence, where you can see that mortar is trapping moisture and the wall wants to push the mortar out. Basements, a lot of repairs with cement mortars again.
I can smell that.
You can smell that. And repairs on the outside where brick is failing, putting a cement, and you can see that brick on the top is being already replaced and brick higher is deteriorating, so rising damp keeps rising. You cannot stop that.
Kick the can.
So it keeps looking for a way out.
Yes.
Or painting, like you see the concrete there, but I've seen paint go up, black tar paint go up a foot and a half, 2 feet. And
cracking foundations, movement usually. Mortar failing, again you see repairs with cement. So a lot of different conditions, sidewalks, basically moving between the summer and the winter, and various materials are being put in the joints improperly, and so on. Repairs on chimney, where instead of rebuilding it, we're trying to extend the life by parging it. It doesn't really work that well. Essentially the wall is going to fall down. So we have a common problem on small buildings when cheek walls are being deteriorated, usually due to the salts that are being used to melt ice that migrate into the wall, and improper repairs with cement eventually require the whole cheek wall to be rebuilt. So walls are aging, and if materials are designed properly, it's nice. These walls are developing a patina, and we can definitely help these walls to maintain its original patina for hundreds of years. I have interesting slide in here asking, basically showing the performance of mortar on both chimneys, and the question is which mortar performs better, the one on the left or the one on the right?
The one on the left,
One on the left. Why is it?
because it's more natural. It's designed to fall apart, and the one on the right,
Yeah, it actually
Growing.
felt.
Growing hair.
Yeah.
On the right is a chia plant.
Yeah, that's right. You can actually take this chimney apart by hand
and put it back together.
and clean the rest of the mortar of the brick, and you can reuse the brick, and you can have another 100 years of wonderful chimney. So, when you're starting to think about restoration, you need to assess the condition. Okay, you have to analyze your materials. You develop the scope. You don't have to do everything at once. You start with the most important part. You do a mock-up. Okay, you can ask your contractor to install a section on your building. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. And you can review it, and you can approve it or disapprove it. If for larger project you have usually specification, you can pre-qualify contractor based on the mock-up and his resume and his references. And the contractor has to bid based on the bench mock-ups. Make sure that crew is trained properly, and you can hire someone to audit or to supervise your contractor, or you can learn enough to understand what quality work should look like. And I can show you that here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just a brief question. We don't have any, I live far out west, we don't have any old buildings like this, but we have, you said the sandblasting has become illegal, I'm sure because of the silicosis and the health reasons and whatnot. But in our area, there's a lot of people using soda ash as a blasting material to clean swimming pools, things like that. I use it to strip paint off of car bodies, things like that. How does that work on something like this brick masonry work?
All right. Sandblasting was very commonly used for many, many years in Chicago, especially to remove paint and dirt from masonry. It was commonly used in 70s, Lincoln Park, Gold Coast area, and sand is manufactured. It's not a natural sand. It's a manufactured sand. They call it a black beauty, very sharp. And removing paint, the sand also removed the fire skin of the brick. Besides being very unhealthy, because you basically have conditions where you're generating a lot of dust, very small particles that you inhale. Also, paint, possibly lead paint, also created conditions where people got sick. And I think the third item, historically very important, is that you remove architectural details from the building. And when you, all of a sudden, you're carving on the stone, it's not as sharp. The brick doesn't have its own fire skin anymore. And I want to show you a brick, a Chicago common brick, which I compare to the loaf of bread. As you can see it here, the outside layer is much darker, much uh, deeper red, the inside is lighter, and when you're looking at the inside, it has openings, has lines where water can be stored and ice can form inside. So this fire skin, we call it, that protects the inside body of the brick from getting too wet. So if you sandblast the brick doesn't perform the same way anymore. So for that reason, sandblasting is no longer allowed. The other, we call it abrasive systems, are now being used on the market, like ice, okay, baking soda, even nutshells and other materials. But it's all same principle. You're bouncing material against the surface. I think it's fine to use this on cars if you protect it well, but it's still not acceptable in restoration, preservation of historic structures. Don't need anything else except the power washer. Make sure that the pressure is not higher than 900 psi, because you have some very powerful power washers up to 3,500 psi, and these can create a lot of damage. So typically what we use in our practice, we use low pressure hot water, where the power washer is connected to a hot box, we call it, and that hot box generates hot water, and it works great. We also have steamers. We use basically steam as a cleaning element, because you have lots of greasy crustaceans on buildings, and if you have hot water, the grease is definitely dissolved. You don't have to use as much chemicals at that point. Normally when we start cleaning buildings, we always start with the gentlest means, we call it. That when you start with just water and see the results. And if we see that we need a bit of a detergents, we will dilute the detergents like 10-1 and see how that works. And if we need to increase the amount of detergents, we increase to a certain level. But that's how you're doing the work, by observing the results. Yes?
Doesn't steaming cause more damage than it does good? I was thinking, you were saying for the water to get out, it kind of takes away from the mortar, the lime.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're steaming, doesn't it work the same way? Doesn't it kind of like deteriorate? Or?
Normally it doesn't. The walls are designed to absorb certain amount of moisture to a certain depth, and they will release that moisture relatively quickly. So I don't see that steam will necessarily cause more damage than water. Most of the damage on buildings is, water is not as, when you're talking about water from rain, you have to think about the amount of acid that you have in the water. You call it acid water, acid rain, right? That acid, because lime is alkaline, basically reacts with lime, right? So over time, that lime is dissolved in that acid rain, and you see your joints getting deeper and deeper because of the acid rain. But now, these days, we have much cleaner air because we don't have chimney smoking on every building like we used to have. Obviously, we have more cars, but we have typically less acid rain. And chemicals that are used to clean buildings are acid-based chemicals. So you have to be careful how you use them, because you can acid burn your brick, or you can acid burn your stone. First of all, you have to saturate your brick, or you saturate your stone to the point that that brick doesn't absorb that chemical, okay? The chemical stays on the face of the brick or stone and you remove quickly. So you apply it on a wet surface and you rinse it down quickly. And you repeat the same procedure a few times. Otherwise, you will, if you put acid on a dry brick, the acid will be absorbed inside because of the porosity of the brick will suck the acid in. You had a question.
Yes, because you're one of those good old-time European tradesmen, professionals and so on. Do you take apprentices? Are there apprenticeship programs for what you do? And if you do, what ethnic group do you normally hire?
I got it, John, thanks.
Well, in our company we have Bohemians, we have Lithuanians, we have Polish, and we have American born.
Hey, Ty is almost Polish.
Ty is almost Polish.
He's
Yeah.
Polish. He's almost Polish.
Matt is German.
He's also Polish. He's
yeah.
Latin.
We have training program through U.S. Heritage Group.
How long does that training program last?
Well,
Your apprenticeship program, like?
we don't have a formal apprenticeship. No, we don't. We train men as he works in our company. He starts doing basic things and then he essentially is being used for more complicated things. We have our men and women are from masons or laborers to masons. They are usually we call it restoration masons because they don't lay new work. And we have architectural conservators with master's degree in conservation of architectural details. And we bring them to the site depend on the requirement of the project, because we can rebuild your cheek wall. Obviously, we're not going to use conservator there. We're going to use restoration mason. Or if you have some mosaic repair project, or if you have statue that needs to be restored, we will use conservator for these.
So, like the city of Chicago has, trade schools for electricians and plumbers and so on. Is there anything such as that in the?
We have a trade school, sort of a trade school through U.S. Heritage Group, where we have programs to train how to use traditional materials and how to install them, how to make them, how to mix them. We have that through U.S. Heritage, and we have many contractors from Chicago area attending these programs. There's one coming up in April, right, Asha?
I wasn't given the date.
And we also travel around the country and we train masons on the site of the building. So where masons bid a job, let's say Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and all of a sudden the mortar is specified to match original. Before they bid, they should understand that, but usually they don't. And all of a sudden the specification said that they have to be certified. We will travel and we will train them on site how to use these materials.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is important in explaining to people. It's not some guy carrying a hodge and just throwing mortar down and slapping a brick on top of it.
Yes, yes. Because since the material have changed, the knowledge that was required to use this material disappeared. So in America, you don't have masons that are still working on sites. They would be at this point about 90 years old, okay? That will have experience working with these traditional materials. When you come from Europe, it's different. I came from Europe with the experience of working with these materials because we had a shortage in Poland, like in any Eastern European countries, of materials. We didn't have Portland cement, so we had to use lime, the cheap stuff. And when you're looking at other countries like mostly northern UK and Scandinavian countries, they never lost the tradition of using traditional materials for restoration of historic structures. The Lime Revival, we call it, that we have started in America when US Heritage was established, started in Europe 40 years ago, 40 years ago, and it started actually in Sweden when Igmar Holström, who's a professor at the university in Stockholm, published his work. And his work concluded that the strength is in weakness. Think about that. Okay? The strength is in the weakness. Because he proved that using weak mortar on buildings in Nordic countries, when you have lots of freezing and thawing cycles, okay, and allowing that mortar to fail protects the buildings for hundreds and thousands of years. So today, actually, it's already 15 years, Portland cement is banned in Norway's and Denmark and Sweden, and to be used on historic structures. You just can't use it. Just like sandblasting is banned in city of Chicago, Portland cement is banned in these countries. It's very destructive element, and unfortunately it's been used, lack of knowledge or ignorance or just lack of care. And you as a building owner of traditional building, historic building, you have to understand that these materials are not acceptable. Always comparing building owner to the owner of antique car. You just don't go with your car for repair anywhere. You're just looking for an expert who's going to repair your car, because you know that you just can't slap anything on it. And we have to treat our buildings the same way. Unfortunately, I was explaining to you that when you repair your joints, you think everything is great, looks good, and it's nice and clean, and you don't think that you have a problem until some time. It takes 10, 15, 20 years to see that that mortar that is installed is actually creating a huge problem, because it created imbalance. All of a sudden, you don't have that moisture movement as free as used to be. All of a sudden, you have slowing down the process of drying, and you creating conditions, including multiple conditions in your walls that normally you don't even see because it's behind your drywall or behind your plaster. It takes time to realize and to understand that the work that has been completed years ago is a problem, and that has to be redone.
What I was going to say too is I think it almost goes without saying, but I don't want anybody taking for granted that the story behind like what most of our brick is here versus what CVS is constructed with. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty safe to say around World War II was kind of things changed. They started using machines to pack the bricks much denser and tighter, as opposed to being hand formed and then dropped into the mold and fired the old way. And I went into Home Depot just to see if it was true what Laura was saying was true. You go there, ask them for a Type O mortar even, and they look at you like you've got a hole in your head. Like they've literally have never heard of a Type O mortar. And so how many people around here are just going to do work on their house or shoemakers, and they don't have a clue. It's destructive.
So the difference between bricks that you have on your house and the bricks that are being made today is this. Okay? They are solid. the traditional brick is solid. The modern brick has holes. Why? Well, you're using less clay, right? That's one reason. Second reason, you're drying it or curing it much faster than you were curing that. This brick, the production process was 2 to 3 weeks long. This is 1 day long process, right? So that's about production. Now, working with lime, which has a particle size 500 times smaller than cement, allows you to bond bricks solid. Working with cement requires holes so the mortar can penetrate inside and keeps those bricks together. Otherwise, the bricks will be moving all directions. Because that mortar, as you're looking at any new masonry, it's always cracked at the edge of the brick. You always see that hairline between the brick and the mortar. So, traditional mortar, and you go to your house and you look at, has lime inclusions, and it's very soft. You can hear by the sound how dull it is.
You can see it powder too when you're
Yeah,
knocking those together.
Take a look at this. It's very, very light, porous. This is modern mortar. You hear it? Very dense. Okay. Very heavy. You take a mortar like this, and you hear, you feel in your hand how heavy it is. So, any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Does the water need to be able to get out on the exterior as well as the interior? So if, I mean, you had the shot of the basement with the concrete, and I know that the brick in my basement has been at least plastered or concreted, and you know, while there's some things I know that we probably need to hire someone like yourself for tuck pointing outside, is there anything I can do on the inside? I mean, should I be removing stuff that's directly attached to the brick on the interior? For example?
Right.
Well, paint, it's more than paint. I mean, it's concrete and plaster.
Right. The wall system is drying on the exterior and the interior at the same time. Especially traditional basements are when they built with brick or stone, or the modern basements where they have concrete and then they have a brick above the concrete. They also need to dry. So applying any paints, applying any cement materials is not a good practice. You will have to remove it because you will see a deterioration of the brick. We work on basements all the time, and stripping off whatever it's on a surface. If you cannot remove from the surface of the brick, at least you remove from the surface of the joint, because you want that joint to allow the moisture to migrate out. Basements, if it's damp, you put dehumidifier and you'll be fine.
Yeah. And so that's really part of your overall assessment when you go to a project site. I mean, kind of understanding what's going on both on the inside and the outside.
Yes,
Yeah.
we evaluate. I just want to show you, I'm just rebooting my computer because I have a good basement story on my computer right now. I can show you how the mechanism basically deteriorates the masonry when you start repairing your basement on the exterior in incorrect way, and you're forcing the interior to damage. Just give me a sec. I have to speak. Using various devices. There are grinders, we call it, and mini grinders with the blade that rotates at very fast speed. You have to be careful how you use that because you can create damage, especially when you work on hard cement mortar. We can cut joints with that high-speed mini grinder. If the joint is wide enough, we will cut in the center of the joint, and then we remove the rest with pneumatic chisels. We use pneumatic chisels to remove the rest of the mortar. But it's important to clean your joints properly, and we have established the ratio of depth by measuring the height. Because you've been, contractor will tell you, oh, I'm going to cut 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or whatever. There is a rule of the cut, because the joints vary from 1/8 of an inch to 3/4. So that the deeper it is, the deeper you cut. It's 2 to 2.5 times the width of your joints is your depth. 2 to 2.5 times. If you have a crack, you're cutting it all the way, very much. Right? And you will be putting mortar as far as you can put it. So you prepare your joints, you have nice clean edges, and you don't have any mortar left on the brick. The mortar is set back 2.5 times the width, and then you're looking at the tools, and tools will be different based on the size of the joints. Okay. There are wide tool, blades, or there are very narrow blades. You cannot even see from. If you have narrow joints, you use very narrow tool, and these tools are designed to fit in the joint. Okay, you use a tool that you can basically fit inside. You don't use a tool like that because you'll be putting lots of mortar on the surface of the brick. So the difference between cement mortar and lime mortar is that lime mortar comes premixed, doesn't have any cement, and we can mix it based on the testing of original mortars. We put same amount of sand and binder, we call it lime, as original, and we pre-pack it for you in a bucket like this. You can use entire bucket or you can use some of it. And because it doesn't have any cement, as long as I keep water on top of my mortar, that mortar will never set. Lime without any cement will not set. You might be asking me how Romans built aqueducts. Well, they have built by adding a hydraulic element into that mix. They added volcanic ash that came from the island of Santorini, or they added a crushed brick or crushed tile, and that was that Portland of Roman times, right? You call it a Roman cement. They created a Roman cement. But if you don't have that hydraulic element, that mortar will not set. So they knew that when they were building bridges, they had to start with stone underwater. They had to use material that contained that hydraulic element. So once we identify original mix for your house, you can use this forever, pretty much, every time you need additional repair. You don't have to go to Home Depot. You just go back to your basement, you dump your water off the mortar, you mix it, and you install it. So mortars are, this is a natural color. This is a mortar without any pigment. But sometimes, especially on a surface, you know, your face brick, you might have mortar in different colors. See, these are pigmented, and the pigment is iron oxide. It's a natural pigment that comes from basically earth. We call it the earth pigment. As you see, this mortar is very dry. It looks like a brown sugar. It's not wet, it's not running, and it's the reason behind it, because the less water you have in a mortar, the less shrinkage you will have once the mortar is put in a joint. And when you work with mortar like this, you're not making a huge mess. You're not putting this sloppy material on your brick or your stone. The way I test mortar is I put in my hand and I make for my...
So when you do the vertical joints, it looks like you're putting the mortar on the back of the knife. Is that right?
It's actually, I'm putting it on the front.
Oh.
Right here. Yeah. Yeah. Well, whatever, yeah, maybe you call it a back, but it's the same way. It's this part of the tool.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not scooping it like a spoon.
No. Just clean that a little bit. No, I'm not scooping it. Just as long as I'm not pressing it, it'll be easy to clean. Okay. So, looks sloppy, right? This is the first stage. You notice it that I didn't do anything with my tool. I didn't try to scrape it or make it nice. There are various tools that are used to finish the joint. And modern tool looks like this. This is a tool that is being used by masons when they lay brick or they lay block. We don't recommend this tool. Why? Because when you press the mortar like this, you're creating very crusty surface. Okay? Surface that's very dense, that doesn't allow moisture to migrate through as freely. What we recommend is having rougher texture. So our techniques are slightly different. We will cut the mortar off like this. Okay, and then we use our tools either to generate as we call it a weather joint, or we take the brush and we hit the joint with the brush. And we have a very nice texture surface that looks like a joint that it's been on a building for a long time. Okay. Same here. So this is not recommended, what I'm showing right now. I'm using this brush. I'm very gentle right now because the mortar is still soft, but if I'm waiting for the mortar to cure, I will be, pounding very hard. But you see, working with white mortar on the color brick, I'm still very nice and clean. Right? So I didn't make any mess. Why? Because I use right material, I use right consistency, and I use right technique to place the mortar in, and right techniques to tool the mortar. We use often wooden tools. I forgot to bring it from my car, but it's basically a square a stick where I can put inside the joint and I can drag it if I want a round surface. I would not use metal, but I will use round stick. Also being able to nicely open that surface so that the moisture can freely migrate. Ah, now we can see. Look what I did. Yeah, now we can see it. So you see the difference. This, you don't want that on your building. You don't want that on your house.
Mr. Martin,
Yes?
on one of the, they said that the mortar dried out different color than when they used the brush on it.
Yes, of course. Because we call it a flash dry. When you bring the paste, because as you dragging your metal tool against the mortar, what you're doing, you're pressing larger particles inside the joint, and you bringing very small particles and the cementitious paste or lime paste to the surface. So you have a lot of binder in here. You don't have lots of aggregate. And if it hits the sun, you basically flashing it, you flash drying it. There's also techniques to rake the joint. Not far from Oak Park, where Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for his horizontal lines. These are developed basically using these this simple tool. My nail is upside down. Yeah, that's okay.
I saw one of those at a garage sale once and I didn't buy it.
You didn't buy it?
That's what it was. It was a long, long time ago.
It was. Yes. Believe it or not, I had to travel to Buffalo, New York to train masons how to restore Frank Lloyd Wright house called, what's the name of the house? To rake the joints at the right depth. The depth has to be consistent. So this is the tool. And I showed them, they said, "Oh, it's so simple. We didn't have to bring you for all that." I said, "Well, it's going to cost you $10,000."
They won't see this.
So what you're doing, you're basically dragging that tool through your joint. and you have same depth, and you have this nice rake joint, and the simple tool, like the nail, basically the farther you take it out, the deeper the joint is. Very simple.
Let's give it shadow.
Yes,
The depth. It's like
yeah, and
that actually
Yep.
could have been a more perfect time to.
yeah, and the Frank Lloyd Wright design was to have horizontal rake and vertical flush. I don't know if you have seen the Robbie house, but that's how it is.
In a different color vertical,
And a different color vertical.
so you don't really see the vertical.
So you don't see it. Right, that's correct.
It's horizontal.
Okay.
You can really see it from back here.
Shadow, especially with that lighting.
So would they have used 2 different piles of mortar as
Yes.
they were going?
Exactly. They will use different type mortar for, as they laying bricks, they will have 2 type of mortar. One will be the red, which will go, where's my trowel here? So the red mortar will go on the edge, we call it a head, right? And you will lay it like this with the red, and this will be a natural color mortar. So that red will be, or the mortar, the brown, for example, brick will be all the way through.
This is a kind of a question I really thought about before, but as they're laying the bricks themselves, that's just mortar.
That's mortar. Yeah.
It's not I mean, just what we see on a redo when we have to repair something after a few decades, and but like, let's say I've heard my house is 2 or 3 brick thick. Is that possible? I mean, is that
Sure.
like a bungalow? Those are little
The
castles. So
the typical bungalow, it's 12-inch wall, right? So 12-inch is basically 3 bricks next to each other, right? So this is 8, right? This is 12, right?
It's just never dawned on me that it's actually the same material
So you
all the way
would
through.
have face brick, and you have 2 rolls of common brick, and in between those bricks you have a little space. We call it an air space, right? So that airspace helped basically with the migration of any moisture and with drying of your walls, because the air can circulate through the entire wall.
I have a question. Is there a time of year that's better to be doing this?
Of course.
That's why he's here.
Of course. Obviously, you're working with mortar that is mixed with water, so you don't want to work in freezing conditions. You also don't want the mortar to dry too fast, because we're not really drying mortar, we're curing mortar. And curing is a slow process. A lime mortar cures over time of years. Cement cures over time of days. The full cure of cement mortar is 28 days. This is what ASTM standard is required to test mortar after 28 days. Lime, you cannot test after 28 days. So we extended testing for lime for 3 months, because the lime cures very slowly. It cures by carbonation, absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Cement cures by hydration, needs water, needs hydro to cure. So when you pouring a sidewalk, you want to spray with water to slow down the curing process, especially in the summer. And you allow the water to react with cement. With lime mortars, you want to spray water to slow down the curing process and to allow lime mortar to absorb moisture And as the moisture migrates out, brings the carbon dioxide, brings the air inside the joint, and that's how you're curing it. So when we working with straight line mortar, we require you to cure the mortar by applying water and drying for at least 8 to 9 times. We call it a 9 wetting and drying cycles.
Can that happen in one day?
No,
Or just like a couple days?
I would say at least 4 to 5 days. You basically, when we come to the site, we spray our walls. We spray noon and we spray evening. The more water you put, the slower you're curing, the stronger it becomes. More durable, I would say, it becomes, because it will never be as strong as cement, compressive wise, but it will be very durable. It will be a basically long performance. Just think about one thing. Your mortar is about 100 years old, right? And when you're looking at your house, it's mostly in good condition. So it's basically saying it to you that I'm working fine, I'm okay. But in some areas where you have excessive amount of moisture on the base of the wall or maybe on the top of the wall, chimney or parapet, that mortar fails because it's designed that way. So it failed after 40, 50 years, so it's a long time. If you repair your brick with the same material, you have same life expectancy, same performance. I can repair your wall and I can give you 20-year warranty without having any risk, because I know that this is the same mortar that you have in the wall. So if it was working for you for 100 years, I know it's going to work for you for another 100 years. I don't have to take any chances. I know for a fact. But if I go to a Home Depot and I buy a bag of mortar, I cannot guarantee anything. I don't know what's in it. There's no lime in it at all. It's mostly cement.
So what's the best way to get all of that Home Depot mortar out that I put in?
Cutting it,
Yeah,
removing
like it.
removing it. the sooner you do this, the better you off. Yeah.
And do you have to cut it differently if it's original lime mortar, or if it's like the hard mortar that might have been repaired 20 years ago?
Yes, lime mortar is not that difficult to be removed.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're very lucky to have buildings that was never repointed, which is not that often. I always get excited about it. And usually we don't repoint entire building because entire building doesn't need to be repointed. We will only do as needed, we call it, spots. And when we match the mortar, we can match identically. We match the size of the aggregate, we match the binder, and we match the color. And we match the technique of installation, so when we finish, you won't be able to tell where we did the work. So lime is not the difficult mortar to be removed. Basically, we soaking walls very long time. That lime mortar becomes much softer, and we scraping it instead of cutting it. You're really scraping it. You use these high-speed grinders when you use cement, when you have cement, because there's no other sort of a way of breaking through it.
Those
Marion,
grinders can cause a lot of damage too, right?
I mean,
Those grinders can cause a lot of damage if you.
tremendous amount of damage, and especially on the very narrow joints, and the finest masonry with the smallest joints is being destroyed because just masons don't understand.
So if a previous owner had put on the wrong mortar and your bricks are now deteriorating, is that something insurance would pay for?
to help restore
I've never seen anybody making a claim, but
They've been very creative.
But
attempts.
I think it's I think it's a good point. I think it's a yeah.
No, you don't have a chance.
Take on the cause.
But it's existing condition.
Let me know if it worked.
One thing I wanted to say real quick is I know I put 5 o'clock on the for the time constraints. So what I was going to suggest is taking about a 5-minute break, and if whoever has to get out of here could, if they like, or whoever wants to stay, I was going to do like a question and answer thing.
I have to leave in 10 minutes.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
Sorry.
Okay.
It's almost. Yeah.
All right. We'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
We'll just let you.
I have to.
We'll write out the Q&As and.
My wife is waiting for me at the event.
My place has a concrete foundation,
Yep.
and then it's got mortar and bricks above it. And somebody a long time ago, I mean at least 25, 30 years ago, used some super high strength cement to go from the concrete to the bricks. I mean, I can't even chip it out with an air hammer.
Right.
Am I going to have to grind that out? I mean,
Yeah. Take a look at the condition of your brick. If the brick is deteriorating, you have to.
yeah.
Yeah. If there is. If
I mean, I can't even see some areas. They only a small section where I have all those issues, but above it, you know, then maybe they were getting the moisture to go down inside the foundation wall, and that's what's causing the rock. Because it's hard as a rock on top.
Yeah, you have to, and you have to remove it mechanically. There's no other way. Yeah. And sometimes when the brick is covered with cement, the brick cannot be saved. You might as well remove entire brick. When you have 12-inch wall, you strip the exterior white and you replace it. It's probably cheaper than trying to, remove the cement and then you're dealing with pointing and it never looks good. Yeah. That way you just take the brick with your cement and replace it with salvage common brick.
I did have a few submissions that I've actually put on I've got a few pics on my iPad I want to put on the screen again.
Okay.
And just kind of get your take.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
Well, I think they seem to be very common in this.
They said that the mortar dried out different color than when they used the brush on it.
Yes, of course. Because we call it a flash dry. When you bring the paste, because as you dragging your metal tool against the mortar, what you're doing, you're pressing larger particles inside the joint, and you bringing very small particles and the cementitious paste or lime paste to the surface. So you have a lot of binder in here. You don't have lots of aggregate. And if it hits the sun, you basically flashing it, you flash drying it. There's also techniques to rake the joint. Not far from Oak Park, where Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for his horizontal lines. These are developed basically using these this simple tool. My nail is upside down. Yeah, that's okay.
I saw one of those at a garage sale once and I didn't buy it.
You didn't buy it?
That's what it was. It was a long time ago.
It was. Yes. Believe it or not, I had to travel to Buffalo, New York to train masons how to restore Frank Lloyd Wright house called, what's the name of the house? To rake the joints at the right depth. The depth has to be consistent. So this is the tool. And I showed them, they said, "Oh, it's so simple. We didn't have to bring you for all that." I said, "Well, it's going to cost you $10,000."
They won't see this.
So what you're doing, you're basically dragging that tool through your joint. And you have same depth, and you have this nice rake joint, and you the simple tool, like, you know, the nail, basically, the farther you take it out, the deeper the joint is. Very simple.
Let's give it a shadow.
Yes,
The
it's,
depth, it's like,
yeah.
and that actually
Yep.
could have been a more perfect time to.
Yeah, and Frank was right.
Yeah.
Design was to have horizontal rake and vertical flush. I don't know if you have seen the Robbie house, but that's how it is.
In a different color vertical,
And a different color vertical.
so you don't really see the vertical.
So you don't see it.
Right, that's correct.
It's horizontal.
Okay.
You can really see it from back here. Shadow.
Especially with that lighting.
So would they have used 2 different piles of mortar as
Yes.
they were going?
Exactly. They will use different type mortar for, as they laying bricks, they will have 2 type of mortar. One will be the red, which will go, where's my trowel here? So the red mortar will go on the edge, we call it a head, right? And you will lay it like this with the red, and this will be a natural color mortar. So that red will be, or the mortar, the brown, for example, brick will be all the way through.
This is a kind of a question I really thought about before, but as they're laying the bricks themselves, that's just mortar.
That's mortar. Yeah.
It's not I mean, just what we see on a redo when we have to repair something after a few decades, and you know, but like, let's say I've heard my house is 2 or 3 brick thick. Is that possible? I mean, is that
Sure.
like, I mean, a bungalow, you know, those are little
Yeah.
castles. So
the typical bungalow, it's 12-inch wall, right? So 12-inch is basically 3 bricks next to each other, right? So this is 8, right? This is 12, right?
It's just never dawned on me that it's actually the same material
So you
all the way
would
through.
have face brick, and you have 2 rolls of common brick, and in between those bricks you have a little space. We call it an air space, right? So that airspace helped basically with the migration of any moisture and with drying of your walls, because the air can circulate through the entire wall.
I have a question. Is there a time of year that's better to be doing this?
Of course.
That's why he's here.
Of course. Obviously, you're working with mortar that is mixed with water, so you don't want to work in freezing conditions. You also don't want the mortar to dry too fast, because we're not really drying mortar, we're curing mortar. And curing is a slow process. A lime mortar cures over time of years. Cement cures over time of days. The full cure of cement mortar is 28 days. This is what ASTM standard is required to test mortar after 28 days. Lime, you cannot test after 28 days. So we extended testing for lime for 3 months, because the lime cures very slowly. It cures by carbonation, absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Cement cures by hydration, needs water, needs hydro to cure. So when you pouring a sidewalk, you want to spray with water to slow down the curing process, especially in the summer. And you allow the water to react with cement. With lime mortars, you want to spray water to slow down the curing process and to allow lime mortar to absorb moisture, and as the moisture migrates out, brings the carbon dioxide, brings the air inside the joint, and that's how you're curing it. So when we working with straight line mortar, we require you to cure the mortar by applying water and drying for at least 8 to 9 times. We call it a 9 wetting and drying cycles.
Can that happen in one day?
No,
Or just like a couple days?
I would say at least 4 to 5 days. You basically, when we come to the site, we spray our walls. We spray noon and we spray evening. The more water you put, the slower you're curing, the stronger it becomes. More durable, I would say, it becomes, because it will never be as strong as cement, compressive-wise, but it will be very durable. It will be basically long performance. Just think about one thing. Your mortar is about 100 years old, right? And when you're looking at your house, it's mostly in good condition. So it's basically saying it to you that I'm working fine, I'm okay. But in some areas where you have excessive amount of moisture on the base of the wall or maybe on the top of the wall, chimney or parapet, that mortar fails because it's designed that way. So it failed after 40, 50 years, so it's a long time. If you repair your brick with the same material, you have same life expectancy, same performance. I can repair your wall and I can give you 20-year warranty without having any risk, because I know that this is the same mortar that you have in the wall. So if it was working for you for 100 years, I know it's going to work for you for another 100 years. I don't have to take any chances. I know for a fact. But if I go to a Home Depot and I buy a bag of mortar, I cannot guarantee anything. I don't know what's in it. There's no lime in it at all. It's mostly cement.
So what's the best way to get all of that Home Depot mortar out that I put in?
Cutting it,
Yeah,
removing it. The sooner you do this, the better you off. Yeah.
And do you have to cut it differently if it's original lime mortar, or if it's like the hard mortar that might have been repaired 20 years ago?
Yes, lime mortar is not that difficult to be removed.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're very lucky to have buildings that was never repointed, which is not that often. I always get excited about it. And usually we don't repoint entire building because entire building doesn't need to be repointed. We will only do as needed, we call it, spots. And when we match the mortar, we can match identically. We match the size of the aggregate, we match the binder, and we match the color. And we match the technique of installation, so when we finish, you won't be able to tell where we did the work. So lime is not the difficult mortar to be removed. Basically, we soaking walls very long time. That lime mortar becomes much softer, and we scraping it instead of cutting it. You're really scraping it. You use these high-speed grinders when you use cement, when you have cement, because there's no other sort of a way of breaking through it.
Marion, I got that. Cause a lot of damage too, right?
Pardon me?
Those grinders can cause a lot of damage if you.
Tremendous amount of damage, and especially on the very narrow joints, and the finest masonry with the smallest joints is being destroyed because just masons don't understand.
So if a previous owner had put on the wrong mortar and your bricks are now deteriorating, is that something insurance would pay for to help restore it?
I've never seen anybody making a claim, but
They've been very creative
attempts. I think it's a good point. I think it's a
No, you don't have a chance.
Take on the cause.
There's existing condition.
Let me know if it worked.
Existing
One thing I wanted to say real quick is though, I know I put 5 o'clock on the for the time constraints. So what I was going to suggest is taking about a 5-minute break, and if whoever has to get out of here could, if they like, or whoever wants to stay, I was going to do like a question and answer thing.
I have to leave in 10 minutes.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
Sorry.
Okay.
It's almost. Yeah.
All right. We'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
We'll just let you.
I have to.
We'll write out the Q&As and.
My wife is waiting for me at the event.
All right, Paige, my place has a concrete foundation,
Yep.
and then it's got mortar and bricks above it. And somebody a long time ago, I mean at least 25, 30 years ago, used some super high strength cement to go from the concrete to the bricks. I mean, I can't even chip it out with an air hammer.
Right.
Am I going to have to grind that out? I mean,
Yeah. Take a look at the condition of your brick. If the brick is deteriorating, you have to.
yeah.
Yeah. If there is. If
I mean, I can't even see some areas. They only a small section where I have all those issues, but above it, you know, then maybe they were getting the moisture to go down inside the foundation wall, and that's what's causing the. Because it's hard as a rock on top.
Yeah, you have to, and you have to remove it mechanically. There's no other way. Yeah. And sometimes when the brick is covered with cement, the brick cannot be saved. You might as well remove entire brick. When you have 12-inch wall, you strip the exterior white and you replace it. It's probably cheaper than trying to, remove the cement and then you're dealing with pointing and it never looks good. Yeah. That way you just take the brick with your cement and replace it with salvage common brick.
I did.